During lunch, a hungry girl interrupts a couple afflicted by illness. She promises to heal the wheelchair-bound wife in exchange for a piece of bread. The next day, the woman walks again before her husband's incredulous eyes. But the real miracle happens when he decides to change his life and the lives of many others. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The midday sun beat down on the streets of New York City that Wednesday in March. In the Upper East Side, the Golden Terrace restaurant attracted the city's elite with its white linen tables and crystal glasses. That day, seated at a corner table, were the couple Henry and Beatrice Almeida. At 52, Henry was one of the most respected real estate entrepreneurs in the United States, dressed in an impeccable suit with a Swiss watch on his wrist. Beside him, Beatrice waited for her lunch in silence. She was 48, but she seemed to have aged decades in the last 5 years. Her eyes carried a deep sadness that not even her makeup could conceal. The navy blue silk dress couldn't hide the greatest symbol of her pain, the wheelchair she was sitting in. Beatrice suffered from a rare degenerative disease diagnosed 5 years earlier. What began as a weakness in her legs quickly evolved into a total loss of movement. The doctors were clear. There was no cure. Henry spared no effort in seeking solutions. He took his wife to the best specialists in the United States, then to clinics at Johns Hopkins, in Germany, in Switzerland. They tried cell therapies, acupuncture, homeopathy, holistic treatments in India. He spent fortunes, but nothing worked. Their marriage, which was celebrating its 26th anniversary, was built on complicity and respect. They met when they were young, when Henry was starting his career and Beatrice was working as an architect. She was the first to believe in his dreams, to encourage him, to celebrate every achievement by his side. But everything changed when the illness arrived. The trips ceased, dinners became rare, friends gradually drifted away, and Beatrice's joy vanished, replaced by a silent melancholy. That afternoon, as they waited for the main course, the silence between them was heavy. Henry was scrolling on his phone, but his mind was far away. He was thinking about how long it had been since he had last heard Beatrice truly laugh. Beatrice stared out the window without seeing. There were moments when she wondered if it was still worth fighting, if it wouldn't be more dignified to accept her condition, and stop dragging Henry on this search for a miracle that would never come. The dining room was full, businessmen discussing deals, couples celebrating, groups of friends sharing gossip. Waiters moved with quiet efficiency. It was in this opulent setting that something unexpected happened. The main door opened and a blast of heat invaded the room. All eyes turned to the entrance, where a girl of about 10 years old stood out like a stain of raw reality. She was thin, small, with sunburnt skin and disheveled dark hair. She wore a faded t-shirt, too big for her body, and worn-out shorts. On her feet were worn rubber flip-flops. In her dirty hands she held an empty white plastic plate, which trembled slightly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Conversations stopped. Everyone watched the girl with a mixture of surprise and poorly disguised indignation. She stood still for a few seconds, her large eyes scanning the room. There was no fear in her gaze, only a strange, unsettling calm for someone so young. The restaurant manager, Roger, hurried out from behind the counter. His face was red with anger. He approached the girl with long strides. "You can't—" "Be in here," he said in a low but firm voice, trying not to cause more of a scene than was already being made. "This is a private establishment. Please leave." The girl didn't move. She looked at him with that same disconcerting calm and said, in a quiet but clear voice, "I'm hungry. I just want a little food." Roger felt the blood rush to his head. He glanced around quickly, noticing that all the customers were watching the situation, some with expressions of disapproval, others with morbid curiosity, but no one showed any sympathy for the intruder. "I can't do that," he replied, already losing his patience. "If you need help, look for a shelter, a church. This is a restaurant, not a social assistance center. Now get out before I have to call security." The girl remained motionless, holding the empty plate against her chest. She didn't seem defiant, just determined. Her eyes scanned the room again, passing over each table, each well-fed face, each plate still full of food that would be wasted. It was then that her gaze met Beatrice's. Something inexplicable happened in that moment. Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. The girl was staring at her intently, not with pity or curiosity, but with a deep recognition, as if she knew her from somewhere, from a distant time. It was a look that pierced the surface and saw beyond, that saw not the wealthy woman in her expensive wheelchair, but the wounded soul that inhabited that body. Beatrice couldn't look away. She felt something stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, pure empathy, without barriers, without judgment. "Let her stay," Beatrice said, her voice breaking the tense silence that had settled. Henry turned abruptly to his wife, surprised. "What?" "Let the girl stay," Beatrice repeated louder now, looking directly at Roger. "Please." The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Almeida, with all due respect, this is not appropriate. We have rules, standards to maintain. If we start allowing just anyone to come in here—" "I know," Beatrice interrupted him, still holding her firm gaze. "But even so, I'm asking you to let her stay. Just this once." Henry gently touched his wife's arm. "Bea," he said softly, trying to be rational, "she probably does this in many places. It's manipulation. Tomorrow we'll have a line at the door." Beatrice finally tore her gaze from the girl and faced her husband. There was something different in her eyes, a spark that Henry hadn't seen in a long time. "I don't care," she said. "Let her stay." Henry sighed. He knew that determination. It was the same one Beatrice showed when she was healthy and fought for something she believed in. Seeing her like this, even for a brief moment, awakened in him a mixture of nostalgia and hope. He looked at Roger and nodded. "Bring her a plate of food and put it on our bill." The manager opened his mouth to protest, but the expression on Henry's face left no room for discussion. Henry Almeida was one of the restaurant's most important clients, responsible for bringing in valuable contacts and closing million-dollar deals at those tables. Contradicting his request, however unusual, was not a smart option. "Yes, sir," Roger muttered through clenched teeth and headed to the kitchen with hurried steps. The girl, who had watched the entire exchange in silence, began to walk toward the couple's table. Some customers looked away, embarrassed. Others watched with poorly concealed disapproval. But she seemed oblivious to it all, focused only on Beatrice. When she reached the table, she stopped at a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice soft but filled with a maturity that didn't match her childish appearance. Beatrice felt a lump in her throat. "You're welcome. What's your name?" The girl hesitated for a moment, as if pondering whether to answer. "Marina," she finally said. "Marina," Beatrice repeated, testing the name. A beautiful name. Henry watched the scene with a mix of skepticism and unease. There was something about the girl that bothered him, though he couldn't quite define what. It wasn't fear or repulsion, but a feeling that something there didn't fit, as if reality had been subtly altered. Roger returned quickly with a covered plate. He placed it on a nearby empty table, making sure to keep his distance from the girl. "Here you are," he said dryly, before walking away. Marina approached the table and uncovered the plate. There was rice, beans, a piece of grilled chicken, salad and roasted potatoes. A simple meal by the restaurant standards, but a banquet for someone who didn't know when they would eat again. She didn't pounce on the food as Henry expected. Instead, she sat down calmly, picked up the cutlery, and began to eat slowly, chewing each bite with attention, as if she wanted to absorb not just the food, but the entire experience. As she ate, her eyes remained fixed on Beatrice. It wasn't an insistent or invasive gaze, but constant, attentive. Beatrice felt strangely vulnerable under that gaze, as if the girl could see through all the masks she had built over the years, all the lies she told herself to endure another day. After a few minutes, Marina wiped her mouth with the paper napkin Roger had grudgingly left and stood up. She approached Beatrice and Henry's table again, but this time she stopped even closer. "I can help you," she said, looking directly at Beatrice. Henry frowned. Help? How? Marina did not take her eyes off Beatrice. I can make you walk again. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the conversations at nearby tables had ceased, everyone now shamelessly attentive to what was happening. Henry felt a wave of anger rise. This was exactly what he had feared. Cheap manipulation, taking advantage of his wife's vulnerability. "Look here, girl," he began, his voice low but laden with threat. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but—" "Henry," Beatrice interrupted him, placing her hand on his. "Let her speak." "B, this is ridiculous. She's a street kid trying to get money. Soon she'll be asking for a fortune to—" "I don't want money," Marina said calmly, still looking only at Beatrice. "I want you to believe. That's all." Beatrice felt her heart race. She didn't know why, but there was something in the child's certainty that touched a part of her that had long given up hope. "How would you do that?" Marina finally looked at Henry, then back at Beatrice. "I just need to touch you, but you can't be afraid. And he," she pointed to Henry, "needs to allow it." Henry let out a bitter laugh. "This is absurd. B, let's go. This has gone too far." But Beatrice didn't move. She looked at Marina with an intensity Henry hadn't seen in years. "Do you really believe you can heal me?" "I know I can," Marina replied with simplicity. Beatrice took a deep breath. A rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, that she was letting herself be carried away by a cruel fantasy created by a clever child. But another part, the part that had been suffocated by years of pain and disappointment, begged for a chance, however small, to believe in something again. "All right," Beatrice said finally. "You can try." "No," Henry said firmly. "B, I will not allow a stranger to put her hands on you. We don't know where she's from, what she has, what kind of—" "Henry," Beatrice said, turning to face him, her eyes shining with tears that threatened to fall. "Please, just this once, let me have hope, even if it's an illusion. Even if tomorrow I wake up and nothing has changed, let me have this moment." The words hit Henry like punches to the gut. He saw in Beatrice's expression how desperate she was, how every day was a struggle just to keep existing, and he realized that, in that moment, denying this request would be crueler than anything a street kid could do. He closed his eyes and nodded, defeated. Marina approached the wheelchair. The people around them watched in absolute silence, some with morbid curiosity, others with disbelief, all captivated by the bizarre moment unfolding before them. The girl knelt before Beatrice, her small dirty hands hovering over the still knees covered by the blue silk. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, and then placed the palms of her hands on Beatrice's legs. What happened next was something none of those present could ever rationally explain. Beatrice felt a wave of heat emanate from the girl's hands, a warmth that didn't burn but coursed through her body like a gentle electric current. It wasn't painful, but intense, pulsating, as if every cell in her body was being awakened from a deep sleep. Her muscles twitched involuntarily, and she had to grip the arms of the chair to keep from falling. Henry stood up abruptly, ready to intervene, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the expression on Beatrice's face, which was not of pain but of astonishment. Perhaps it was the certainty in Marina's posture, who remained motionless, her eyes closed, concentrating. The moment lasted perhaps 20 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sensation ceased. Marina opened her eyes, removed her hands, and stood up. "Tomorrow morning," she said simply. "You will feel it." Beatrice was pale, breathing heavily. "What was that?" Marina took a step back. "I told you, you just need to believe, and he—" she looked at Henry again, "needs to decide what he's going to do." Before anyone could respond, the girl turned and started walking toward the door. Henry was still processing what he had just witnessed when he shouted, "Wait, where are you going?" Marina stopped and looked over her shoulder. "I'm leaving. Tomorrow you will understand everything." And then she left, disappearing into the crowd on the sidewalk, as if she had never been there. The restaurant's dining room erupted in murmurs. Roger approached the table, clearly relieved that the embarrassment was over. "1,000 apologies for the inconvenience, Mr. Almeida. May I bring you dessert?" Henry didn't answer. He stared at the door where the girl had left, then at Beatrice, who still seemed to be in shock, her hands trembling in her lap. "Bea," he said softly, "how are you feeling?" Beatrice took a moment to reply. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "I don't know. It was so strange, Henry. So real." "Let's go home," he said, already signaling for Roger to bring the bill. "You need to rest." "Mummy." The way back inside the chauffeured luxury car, neither of them spoke. Henry looked out the window, his mind working frantically to find a rational explanation for what had happened. Psychological suggestion? Some kind of hypnosis? But he had seen the expression on Beatrice's face, had felt the strange energy that emanated from that moment. He couldn't just dismiss it as a fraud. Beatrice, for her part, kept her hands on her legs, trying to recreate that sensation of warmth, that awakening she had felt. Was it real, or just her desperate brain creating illusions? That night, lying in the king-sized bed in the spacious, luxurious bedroom of their Upper East Side apartment, Beatrice couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, reliving every second of the encounter with Marina. The girl's words echoed in her mind. "Tomorrow morning, you will feel it." Beside her, Henry was also awake, though he pretended to be asleep. He felt ashamed for having allowed a street kid to mess with his emotions, for having given Beatrice hope when he knew that most likely they would wake up the next day and nothing would have changed. And then the pain of disappointment would be even greater. The hours dragged on with torturous slowness. Every noise from the street, every blink of the digital clock on the nightstand seemed amplified in the heavy silence of the room. And then, as the first light of dawn began to paint the New York sky with shades of pink and orange, it happened. Beatrice felt something, a subtle, almost imperceptible tingling, starting in her toes and slowly moving up her legs. Her heart pounded. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying it wasn't just another illusion from her tired mind. The tingling intensified. It became more defined, more real, and then, for the first time in 5 years, Beatrice moved the toes on her right foot. The scream that escaped her throat woke not only Henry, but probably half the neighborhood. Henry leaped out of bed, fully alert. "What is it? What happened? Are you in pain?" Beatrice was sitting up in bed, her hands shaking violently as she touched her own legs. "Henry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "I can feel them. Oh my God, I can feel my legs." Henry froze. "That's not possible." Beatrice looked at him, tears streaming freely down her face. "I moved my toes. I felt it. Henry, I felt it." He approached slowly, as if he feared any sudden movement might shatter that fragile moment. "Try again. Try to move something." Beatrice took a deep breath, concentrating, and then, slowly, painfully, her left foot moved. It was a small movement, but undeniable. Henry felt his legs give way. He sank to the floor beside the bed, his eyes fixed on Beatrice's feet, which were now moving, albeit with difficulty. It wasn't possible. Modern science, with all its advancements and resources, had declared her case hopeless. And now a street kid had done the impossible. "Bea," he said, his voice broken with emotion, "this is real. This is really happening." Beatrice tried to laugh, but the sound came out mixed with sobs. "I don't know what's happening, Henry. I don't understand. But I can feel. After so long, I can feel." They stayed like that for long minutes, hugging, crying, laughing, caught between shock, disbelief, and a joy so intense it almost hurt. That's when the doorbell rang. Henry looked at the clock. It was only 6:15 in the morning. Who could it be at this hour? "I'll get it," he said, quickly wiping his face and putting on a robe. Beatrice waited in bed, still processing the miracle that was happening to her body. When Henry opened the door, he found exactly who, on some deep level of his consciousness, he knew would be there. Marina stood in the hallway wearing the same clothes as the day before, the same serene expression on her face. "I told you," she said simply. Henry was speechless. His rational mind fought against what his eyes were seeing, against what was happening inside his apartment at that very moment. "How did you?" he began, but couldn't finish the question. There were so many questions, and at the same time none of them seemed adequate. Marina entered without being invited, walking with the confidence of someone who knew the way. She went to the bedroom, where Beatrice was still sitting on the bed, now with her legs over the side, her feet touching the floor. When she saw the girl, Beatrice began to cry again. "You did it. You really did it." Marina approached and sat on the edge of the bed next to Beatrice. "I said I could, but this is only half of... But this, it." "Half?" Henry asked, entering the room behind her. Marina turned to him. "The healing of her body is complete, but the other half of the healing depends on you." "On me?" Henry felt a wave of apprehension. "What do you want?" The girl looked at him with those deep, ancient eyes too old for her young face. "It's not what I want. It's what you need to do. Yesterday, at the restaurant, while I was eating, I watched everything around me. I saw people being thrown out like I almost was. I saw food being thrown in the trash, while children starve on the street outside. I saw wealth being wasted while others die in poverty." Henry felt uncomfortable. "I'm not responsible for all the world's problems." "No," Marina agreed. "But you have power. You have resources. You have influence, and now you have a debt." "A debt," Henry repeated, his voice hardening. "So this is extortion. You want money?" Marina shook her head. "I didn't come to beg. I came to offer an opportunity. Your wife's recovery is a gift, but it is also a test. What will you do with the second chance she has been given? And more importantly, what will you do with the second chance you are being given?" Henry frowned. "What second chance?" "The chance to remember who you were before you became who you are now," Marina said softly. "The chance to do something that truly matters." Beatrice watched the exchange in silence, her hands still caressing her own legs, marveling at every recovered sensation. She saw an internal struggle on her husband's face, and she knew Henry well enough to know that the girl's words had touched something deep, something he had buried long ago under layers of success and sophistication. "What do you want me to do?" Henry finally asked, his voice low. Marina stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the waking city below. "I want you to use everything you have, everything you've built, to help those no one sees. I want you to remember that you were once one of them." The last words hit Henry like a lightning bolt. He froze, memories he had suppressed for decades surging violently into his mind. Henry Almeida was not born on the Upper East Side. His childhood took place in the Bronx, the son of a laundress and a mechanic. The family lived in a 3-room apartment. Henry slept on a thin mattress on the living room floor, sharing the space with his 2 brothers. He knew hunger well. He remembered the nights his mother divided a single loaf of bread among the 3 children and pretended not to be hungry. He remembered going to school with an empty stomach, the worn-out shoes that left his feet wet on rainy days. But his mother, Mrs. Carmen, had unwavering faith. She said that God had bigger plans for her children, that education was the only true inheritance. She could leave them. She worked 14 hours a day washing clothes, but always with a smile and words of encouragement. It was this faith that pushed Henry forward. He studied fiercely, got a scholarship to a city university, and graduated with honors in civil engineering. At 25, he was already working for a construction company. At 30, he started his own firm. By 35, he was a millionaire. But on the path to success, something was lost. Visits to his parents' home became rare. Childhood friends were replaced by business contacts. His language changed, his tastes changed, his values changed. Henry convinced himself that he had left that life behind through his own merit. He told himself he helped his family financially, and that was enough. He bought his parents a house, paid for his brother's college, sent money every month. But he stopped sitting at the table with them. He stopped being that boy who knew hunger. Now, standing before Marina, with his wife regaining the movement in her legs, all those memories came flooding back. The street girl in front of him could have been him decades ago. That empty plate was the same one he held when he knocked on neighbors' doors asking for bread. "You don't know anything about me," Henry said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marina turned to face him. I know you've forgotten where you came from. I know you've built walls around yourself so you don't have to look at those who were left behind. I know that inside you, there is still the boy who promised his mother he would make a difference in the world. How do you know about my mother? Henry felt a chill. Marina didn't answer directly. True faith isn't proven with words. It's proven with actions. Your wife has received back what she lost. Now it's your turn to give back what you took. I didn't take anything from anyone, Henry protested. Didn't you? Marina tilted her head. How many people were evicted from the land you bought for your condominiums? How many families lost their homes so you could build towers that only the rich can afford? Henry felt anger rise. I follow the law. I do everything legally. The law of men, Marina said calmly, is not always the law of what is right. Beatrice, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. She was standing, leaning on the headboard of the bed, testing her weight on her legs. Henry, she said softly, maybe she's right. Henry turned sharply to his wife. B, you can't be serious. Beatrice looked at him with those eyes he loved, now shining with a clarity he hadn't seen in years. For how long did I beg God for a miracle? How many doctors did we see? How much money did we spend trying to buy my cure? And then a street girl with nothing does what all of science couldn't. Do you think that means nothing? It means we don't understand what happened, Henry argued. It could have been spontaneous remission, some biological process the doctors didn't detect. We can't base important decisions on superstition. Marina walked to the bedroom door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. You have 3 days to decide. If you do nothing in that time, the healing will go away. And next time, there won't be a second chance. Wait, Beatrice cried, taking a few unsteady steps toward the girl. How can I trust what you're saying? How do we know this isn't some kind of trick? Marina looked at her, with compassion. You already know, deep in your heart, that it's not a trick. You felt the warmth. You felt the awakening. Your faith healed you, not me. I just showed you the way. And what exactly do you want me to do? Henry asked, his voice filled with frustration and fear. Yesterday at the restaurant, while everyone ate from their expensive plates, I counted 12 plates of food being thrown in the trash. Enough food to feed 50 children like me. The manager would have thrown me out if you hadn't intervened. And tomorrow other children will be thrown, out of other places. That needs to change. Henry ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he made when under pressure. And how exactly am I supposed to change that? You are powerful, influential, well-known. Turn that restaurant into a place that feeds not only the rich, but also the hungry. Use your wealth to create programs that help real people, not just charity events to clear your conscience and appear in magazines. Beatrice approached her husband and held his hand. Henry, she whispered, maybe this is exactly what we needed, both of us. Not just my physical recovery, but our recovery as people. Henry looked at his wife, then at the girl, then at his own hands. Hands that had built empires, signed million-dollar contracts, but how long had it been since they had touched something real, something that mattered beyond profit? 3 days, Marina repeated, and then left the room. Henry heard the apartment door close seconds later. The silence that remained was heavy, laden with unanswered questions and impossible decisions. Do you believe her? Henry finally asked. Beatrice sat on the bed again, exhausted from the effort of standing. I'm walking, Henry. After 5 years of not feeling my legs, I'm walking. If that's not reason enough to believe, I don't know what is. Henry approached and knelt before her, holding her hands. B, I would die if I lost you again. If this girl is telling the truth and the healing could disappear, then you know what you have to do, Beatrice completed. He closed his eyes. It's not that simple. You're asking me to change everything. My company, my reputation, my way of doing business. People will think I've gone crazy. Maybe, Beatrice said softly. We needed to go a little crazy. Henry, when was the last time you felt truly good about something you did? Not financially good, but morally good. The question hit Henry hard. He thought, searching his recent memories, looking for a moment when he had felt the pure satisfaction of doing something right, something good, without calculating return or benefit. And he couldn't find one. That scared him more than any threat Marina could have made. That morning, while Beatrice did gentle physical therapy to strengthen the muscles that had been inactive for so long, Henry locked himself in his office. He looked out the window at the city, stretching below, thinking of how many Marinas existed down there, invisible, forgotten, slowly dying while people like him dined in luxury restaurants. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Paul, I need you to schedule a meeting with Roger, the manager of the Golden Terrace, today, if possible." Paul, accustomed to his boss's strange requests, just took a note. "Anything specific I should mention?" "Tell him I want to discuss a partnership, a social project." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A social project, sir." "Yes," Henry confirmed, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "A social project." The meeting was set for 3 in the afternoon. Henry arrived at the restaurant wearing his most expensive suit, like armor against the vulnerability he felt. Roger received him with all the deference an important client deserved, but there was poorly disguised curiosity in his eyes. They sat at the same table where it had all begun the day before. Henry looked around, seeing the place with different eyes now, every table occupied by people who, like him, had forgotten the privilege of being able to choose what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. "Mr. Almeida," Roger began, "your assistant mentioned a social project. I'm intrigued." Henry took a deep breath. "I want to implement a program here at the restaurant. Every day at the end of the service, instead of throwing away the leftover food, I want it to be prepared and distributed for free to people in vulnerable situations." Roger blinked, processing the information. "Distributed? Here at the restaurant?" "Yes. We can set up a structure out back, discreet but accessible. Nothing that interferes with normal operations or bothers the clients." The manager hesitated. "Mr. Almeida, with all due respect, this could create problems. Our clientele expects a certain standard, a certain exclusivity. If we start attracting the homeless population—" "That's why it will be discreet," Henry interrupted him. "And besides, I will personally finance it. Necessary renovations, additional operational costs, everything. You won't have to spend anything from the restaurant's budget." Roger frowned. "But why? If I may ask, what do you gain from this?" Henry thought about the question. What did he gain? The possibility of keeping his wife healthy, the chance to recover a part of himself he had lost, the opportunity to look in the mirror without feeling ashamed. "Let's just say it's a personal matter," he finally replied, "and I'm willing to make it advantageous for you as well. In addition to covering all the costs, I can guarantee positive publicity. Imagine the articles. Luxury restaurant blends exclusivity and social responsibility. It would be excellent for the image." Roger still seemed uncertain, but Henry knew men like him. He knew because he had once been one of them. He just had to find the right angle, the right benefit, and any moral resistance would crumble. "Let me think about it," Roger said finally. "It's an unusual proposal, but maybe it could work." "You have until tomorrow to decide," Henry said, standing up. "And Roger, remember that girl from yesterday. She was hungry, truly hungry, and we, all of us here, throw food in the trash while she begged for scraps. Think about it." He left the restaurant feeling strangely light, as if he had left behind a weight he had been carrying for years without realizing it. When he got home, he found Beatrice in the living room, walking slowly from one side to the other, holding onto furniture for balance. Her eyes shone with joy. "Look," she said, smiling, "I can already take 10 steps without support." Henry felt his chest tighten with emotion. "You look beautiful." She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in so long he had almost forgotten what it was like. "What did you do today?" He told her about the meeting with Roger, about the proposal for the food distribution program. Beatrice listened in silence, and when he finished, there were tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. Those words coming from her meant more than any $1 million contract he had ever signed. "But it's not over yet," Henry said. "Roger hasn't agreed yet, and even if he does, is that enough? Marina said I need to do more. She said I need to use everything I've built to help real people. Beatrice approached and hugged her husband. Then that's what we'll do, together. That night, they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, calculators, and laptops. They began to map out possibilities. How many restaurants did Henry know through his business contacts? How many of his companies had built buildings that could have spaces dedicated to social programs? How many plots of land did his construction company own that could be turned into community centers instead of more luxury condos? The hours passed. Dawn arrived. And for the first time in many years, Henry Almeida worked on something that didn't have profit as its ultimate goal, but good. When the sun rose on the second day, he already had a plan. He called his lawyers, his accountants, his project managers. He called an emergency meeting with his company's board of directors for that afternoon. The reaction was exactly what he expected. Disbelief, resistance, arguments about fiscal responsibility, about duties to shareholders, about reputational risks. "Are you suggesting," one of the directors said, clearly incredulous, "that we divert significant resources from our profitable projects to social programs that will bring no financial return?" "I'm suggesting," Henry replied calmly, "that we remember we are people before we are business people, that we have a responsibility to the community that made us rich." "Is this business or philanthropy?" another director asked. "Why can't it be both?" "Because that's not how the market works, Mr. Almeida. With all due respect, this sounds more like a personal crisis than a sound business decision." Henry looked around the table, seeing men and women who, like him, had dedicated their lives to accumulating wealth and power. He wondered how many of them, in their quiet moments, felt the same emptiness he felt. "Then consider this my personal crisis," he said, "but it's a crisis I'm going to turn into action, with you or without you." The silence that followed was tense. Finally, the CFO, a woman named Lucy, who had worked with Henry for 15 years, spoke. "Mr. Almeida," she said carefully, "I understand you're going through a difficult time with your wife's health, and we are genuinely happy about her recovery. But decisions made under emotional stress are rarely good business decisions." "My wife is healed," Henry said, and the firmness in his voice surprised even himself. "For the first time in 5 years, she is walking, and that has made me realize how many other healings are possible if we truly care. How many lives we can change if we use our resources not just to get richer, but to lift others up." Lucy exchanged glances with the other directors. "Mr. Almeida, if you insist on this path, we must warn you that many of us will consider leaving the company." Henry nodded slowly. "I understand and I respect each of your decisions, but my decision is made." The meeting ended in a chilly atmosphere. 2 directors resigned before the end of the day. 3 others sent formal emails expressing concern about the company's direction and requesting meetings with the shareholders. Henry knew he was risking everything he had built, but for the first time in decades, he felt like he was building something that truly mattered. Beatrice supported every decision. That evening, as they had dinner at home instead of their usual restaurant, she said, "You know what's strange? I feel more alive now in these 2 days than I have in the last 5 years. Henry held her hand across the table. "Even risking everything?" "Especially risking everything," she replied, "because we are finally living for something bigger than ourselves." On the morning of the 3rd day, Henry woke up early. He knew it was the last day of the deadline Marina had given. He felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He had done what he could, but would it be enough? His phone rang. It was Roger. "Mr. Almeida," the manager's voice sounded. Different, less formal, more human. "I spent the night thinking about what you said, about the girl, about the waste. And you're right. I accept your proposal. We're going to implement the food distribution program." Henry felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Roger. You won't regret it." "Actually," the manager continued, "I want to go further. I spoke with other restaurant managers in the chain. They're interested too. We could do this on a larger scale." Henry smiled genuinely. That would be extraordinary. After hanging up, he hugged Beatrice, who was in the kitchen making coffee. "It's started," he said. "It's really started." She kissed his forehead. "I'm proud of you." But Henry knew there was still more to do. He spent the day visiting the neighborhoods he came from, places he hadn't set foot in for years: the Bronx, Brownsville, Queensbridge. He spoke with community leaders, met families living in situations he had tried to forget existed. In every conversation, he heard stories of struggle, of resilience, of people working 3 jobs and still not being able to feed their children properly. He saw children who could have been him decades ago. He saw mothers who were his mother, washing clothes until their hands bled to give their children a chance at a better future. And in every face, he saw Marina. He saw the reflection of that mysterious girl who had changed everything. When he returned home in the late afternoon, exhausted but strangely energized, he found a surprise. Marina was sitting in the living room, talking calmly with Beatrice as if they were old friends. "You came back," Henry said, unable to hide the relief in his voice. Marina looked at him with that soft, enigmatic smile. "I came to see if you held up your end of the bargain." Henry sat down and began to tell her everything he had done in the last 3 days. The program at the restaurant, the meetings with community leaders, the plans to turn company land into assistance centers, the partnerships he was forming, the directors he lost, the risks he took. When he finished, Marina remained silent for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city illuminated by the nightlights. "You did well," she finally said, "but the work is just beginning." "And Beatrice's healing?" Henry asked. Unable to hide his anxiety, Marina turned to look at Beatrice, who was standing unsupported, her eyes shining with tears of hope. "The healing remains, because it was earned with true faith and true action. But remember, faith is not a moment. It is a choice that is renewed every day." Beatrice let out a sob of relief. "Thank you for everything." Marina walked to her and held her hands. "You thank me, but you were the one who believed. You were the one who had the courage to hope. And he," she looked at Henry, "was the one who had the courage to change." "Who are you?" Henry asked, the question he had been holding back since their first meeting. "Really, who are you?" Marina released Beatrice's hands and walked toward the door. "I am someone who was once hungry and was fed. Someone who was once lost and was found. Someone who believes that miracles happen when people decide to be human again." "Will we see you again?" Beatrice asked. Marina stopped at the door and looked back. "Whenever you look at someone in need and choose to help, you will see me. Whenever you use what you have to lift up those who have fallen, you will find me. I never left. You were the ones who had forgotten how to look." And with those words, she left, gently closing the door behind her. Henry and Beatrice stood in silence, processing everything that had happened in the last 3 days. Their lives had been turned upside down, but strangely, they felt more balanced than ever. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Beatrice asked. Henry hugged his wife. "I think she'll always be, wherever there are people who need help. And now that we've started looking, we'll see her everywhere." That night, before going to sleep, Henry did something he hadn't done in many years. He called his mother in the Bronx. "Mom," he said, when Mrs. Carmen answered, her voice tired from a long day's work, "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." On the other end of the line, Mrs. Carmen began to cry, and Henry cried with her, releasing years of guilt, of distance, of forgetfulness. "I'm coming to visit you tomorrow," he said, "and I'm going to tell you about a project that will help people like we used to be, and I want your help. I want your wisdom." "My son," Mrs. Carmen said through her tears, "I always knew this day would come. I always prayed that you would remember who you are." Henry hung up the phone, feeling that something had been healed inside him too, not just Beatrice's body, but his own soul, which had been sick for so long without him realizing it. And as the city of New York continued its frantic dance inside that Upper East Side apartment, a couple was rediscovering what it truly meant to be alive. The months that followed were a time of profound transformation. It didn't happen overnight, nor was it easy. Every step required courage, sacrifice, and renewed faith. The food distribution program at the Golden Terrace started small. In the first few days, only 5 or 6 people showed up. Roger set up a discreet area with simple tables under an awning. The food was plentiful and of good quality. Beatrice made a point of being there every afternoon. Still in recovery, she used a cane for support, but her determination was unshakable. She served the plates personally, talked with each person, listened to their stories without rushing. Henry accompanied her whenever he could. At first, he felt uncomfortable. He didn't know how to talk to these people without feeling guilt or pity. But Beatrice taught him it wasn't about pity. It was about humanity. It was about recognizing an equal in every face. Within 2 weeks, the number of people served had tripled. Word had spread on the streets, and now there were lines every afternoon. Entire families, the elderly, unemployed youth, single mothers with small children. Each face told a story. Mrs. Irene, who had lost her home in a fire. John, who had left an abusive home and was trying to survive on odd jobs. The Silver family, who lived in a shack and struggled to get 2 meals a day. Beatrice knew every name, every story. She talked, asked how their day had been, if they needed anything besides food. She started bringing clothes she no longer wore, shoes, blankets. Henry organized donations among his business contacts. It was during one of these afternoons that something happened that would change everything again. Beatrice was serving soup to a girl of about 8 when she noticed a nasty wound on her arm, red and swollen. The girl's mother, embarrassed, explained that she had burned herself with hot water. They had no money for a doctor. Beatrice felt her heart ache. She called Henry, who was in a meeting. "I need your help," she said. "Urgent." Half an hour later, Henry arrived. Beatrice explained the situation, and together they took the child to the hospital. They paid for private care, ensuring proper treatment. The burn was infected. A few more days without treatment could have had serious consequences. While they waited at the hospital, Henry spoke with the girl's mother, a young woman named Fabian, who couldn't have been more than 30, but looked 50. She told him she worked as a house cleaner, but even so, the money wasn't enough. The rent for the shack, food, transportation, the irregular water and electricity bills she paid for illegal hookups, it all consumed every cent she earned. "How many people live like this?" Henry asked, more to himself than to her. Fabian gave a tired smile. "You have no idea, sir. My situation is still good compared to many. At least I have a job. Some people don't even have that." That conversation stuck in Henry's head. That night at home, he and Beatrice had a long discussion. "Feeding people is important," he said, pacing the living room, "but it's just a temporary fix. The next day they're still homeless, jobless, without prospects. We need to do more." Beatrice was sitting on the sofa, her legs crossed, a position that would have been impossible months ago. "What are you thinking?" Henry stopped pacing and looked at her. "I'm thinking about completely changing the focus of the company. Instead of building more luxury condos that only the rich can afford, why not use our resources to build affordable housing? Why not create job training programs? Why not generate real opportunities?" "That's a big change," Beatrice said carefully. "Risky." "I know. I've already lost half my board. I'll probably lose more. The shareholders will be furious. I might even lose control of the company." "And you still want to do it?" Henry sat down beside her and took her hands. "B, for the first time in many years, I wake up in the morning and don't feel that weight on my chest, that feeling that I'm living a life that isn't mine. When I see Mrs. Irene smile when she gets a plate of hot food, when I see Fabian's daughter getting better in the hospital, I feel like I'm finally doing something that matters." Beatrice squeezed his hands. "Then let's do it." The company's transformation began the following week. Henry called meetings with architects, engineers, social workers. He began to design a revolutionary project, quality housing complexes, but with affordable prices for low-income families. It wouldn't be charity. People would pay according to their ability, and the profit would be reinvested in new projects. The reaction was explosive. Half the shareholders threatened to sue. 3 key managers resigned. The business press published articles questioning the sanity of Henry Almeida, the entrepreneur who had apparently decided to destroy his own empire. But there were also those who supported him. Lucy, the CFO he expected to be one of the first to leave, surprised him by requesting a private meeting. "Mr. Almeida," she said, sitting across from his desk, "I've spent the last few weeks analyzing your proposal, and you know what I found?" Henry braced himself for another argument about fiscal responsibility and return on investment. "I found that it's possible," she continued. "It won't be as profitable as our current model, I won't lie, but it's sustainable. We can do this without bankrupting the company, and what's more, we can create a model that other companies can replicate." Henry was genuinely surprised. "Are you serious?" Lucy opened a laptop and began showing spreadsheets, projections, market analyses. "Look, if we partner with the government for subsidies, if we optimize costs using sustainable but efficient materials, if we create our own financing system with low interest rates, we can make this viable. We won't get rich from it, but we'll generate real impact. And you know what else? This could even be good for our brand in the long run." Henry looked at the woman who had worked with him for 15 years and realized he had never truly known her. "Why are you doing this?" Lucy closed the laptop and looked directly at him. "Because you reminded me why I chose this profession. It wasn't for the money, though that helps. It was because I wanted to build things. I wanted to see projects come off the page and become real. And in recent years I had forgotten that. I was just pushing numbers, maximizing profits, forgetting that behind every number are people, real lives being affected." "Welcome back," Henry said, smiling. Together they began to work on what they would call Project Rebirth. It wasn't just about building houses. It was about creating communities. Each housing complex would have a school, a health clinic, a recreation area, community spaces. There would be job training programs, daycares for working mothers, community gardens. Beatrice became fully involved. She used her experience as an architect, dormant for years, to help design spaces that were not just functional but beautiful, dignified. She insisted that every house have abundant natural light, proper ventilation, a small garden. She argued that low-income people deserved beauty as much as anyone else. The first pilot project would be on a plot of land the company owned in Hunts Point in the Bronx. Henry made a point of going to the site himself, walking the neighborhood streets, talking to the residents. He wanted to understand what they needed, what they dreamed of, what they considered important. It was during one of these visits that he met Mr. Robert, a 65-year-old man who had lived in a wooden shack for 30 years. He had worked his entire life as a bricklayer, but now, old and in poor health, he survived on odd jobs and help from neighbors. "Have you built many houses in your life?" Henry asked as they drank coffee from aluminum mugs in Mr. Robert's simple home. "Many," the old man replied with pride. "Buildings, houses, even a shopping mall downtown. My hands helped build this city." "And you never had your own house?" Mr. Robert gave a sad smile. "To build houses for others? My boy, there was never enough money left for my own." Henry felt a lump in his throat. "That's going to change. When Project Rebirth is finished, you will have a real house, and it's not a favor, it's a right." The old man looked at him with suspicion. "Politicians promise a lot and deliver little. I'm not a politician. I'm just someone who took too long to see, but now I can't close my eyes anymore." That night, Henry returned home emotionally exhausted, but with a renewed purpose. He found Beatrice on the balcony looking at the starry sky. "Do you think Marina is seeing all this?" she asked when Henry sat beside her. "I think she never left," Henry replied. "I think she is all those people we help. She's Mrs. Irene, John, Fabian's daughter, Mr. Robert. She's in every face we choose to see instead of ignore." Beatrice rested her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I wake up in the morning and move my legs just to make sure it wasn't a dream, that I'm really healed. You are. But you know what I've realized? The real healing wasn't just physical, it was in everything, in us, in our way of seeing the world." The following months were intense. Project Rebirth faced endless bureaucracy, resistance from politicians who had deals with other construction companies, and sabotage attempts from competitors who saw the model as a threat to the lucrative traditional real estate market. But Henry and his team persisted. Lucy proved to be a formidable ally, using her financial expertise to find creative solutions for every obstacle. Beatrice mobilized architect friends who joined the project voluntarily, donating their time and knowledge. The food distribution program expanded. Now there were 10 restaurants in different boroughs of New York, feeding more than 500 people a day. But more than that, they became meeting points, places where vulnerable people could not only receive food, but also talk, make connections, and find opportunities. It was at one of these points that Beatrice met Lucia, a 40-year-old woman who had lost her job and home in a series of personal tragedies. Lucia was trained as an accountant, but after a year on the streets, her self-esteem was shattered. She no longer believed she could return to the workforce. Beatrice saw potential where Lucia saw only failure. She spoke with Henry, who spoke with Lucy, and within 2 weeks Lucia was hired as a financial assistant for Project Rebirth. It wasn't charity. She was competent, dedicated, and brought a unique perspective from having lived the reality of the people the project sought to help. Lucia's case opened Henry's eyes to a new possibility. Why not hire more people who were in vulnerable situations? Why not give real opportunities instead of just handing out arms? They created a first job program for young people from underserved communities. They offered training, hired homeless people who wanted a fresh start, and gave chances to those society had written off. Not everyone succeeded. There were disappointments, people who didn't take advantage of the opportunities, others who returned to old habits. But many flourished, like Raphael, a 20-year-old who started as an office boy and within 6 months was being trained as a project assistant. Like Martha, a woman who had come from a difficult situation and now coordinated volunteers in the food distribution program. Henry and Beatrice's life changed completely. The apartment on the Upper East Side, once a symbol of status, now seemed excessively large and empty. They decided to sell it and move to a smaller, simpler house in a middle-class neighborhood. The money from the sale was invested entirely in Project Rebirth. Old friends drifted away, unable to understand the transformation. But new friends emerged, people who shared the same values, who believed it was possible to use resources and privilege to make a real difference. One day, almost a year after the initial encounter with Marina, Henry and Beatrice were attending the handover ceremony for the first 50 houses of Project Rebirth. It was a sunny Saturday, and hundreds of people had gathered at the new housing complex in the Bronx. The poor houses were modest but dignified. Each had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a full bathroom, and a small backyard. Nothing luxurious, but built with quality, with care, thinking about every detail that would make a difference in the families' lives. Mr. Robert was there holding the keys to his new home with trembling hands. At 66, for the first time in his life, he would have a real home. He cried when Henry handed him the keys personally. "You don't know what this means," the old man said, his voice choked with emotion. "I know," Henry replied. "And that's why I made sure to be here today." During the ceremony, Beatrice gave a speech. She spoke about second chances, about how everyone deserves dignity, about how small actions can create great transformations. Her voice was firm, her body healthy, standing without any support. But in the middle of the crowd, Henry saw a familiar face. Marina was there, leaning against a tree at the edge of the property, watching everything with a serene smile. Henry's heart raced. It had been almost a year since he had last seen her. He muttered an excuse and stepped away from the ceremony, walking quickly to where she stood. "You came," he said, out of breath. Marina looked at him with those deep, wise eyes. "I was always here. You were just the one who sometimes forgot to look." Henry looked around, at the new houses, at the happy families receiving their keys, at Beatrice on the makeshift stage speaking passionately about hope. "We did what you asked. We changed. We're helping." Marina nodded. "You did more than I asked. You truly transformed. Not just in your actions, but in your essence." "Is Beatrice's healing permanent?" he asked, the question that haunted him in moments of weakness. "The healing is permanent as long as the faith is alive," Marina replied. "And faith isn't believing that miracles will happen. It's acting in a way that makes miracles possible." Henry felt tears burn his eyes. "Thank you for everything, for showing us the way." Marina lightly touched his arm. "I didn't show you the way. I just reminded you that it was always there. The rest was your choice. Will we see you again? She gave that enigmatic smile. Whenever you look at someone in need and see a human being instead of a problem, you will see me. Whenever you choose compassion over indifference, I will be there. Henry blinked to clear his tears, and when he opened his eyes, Marina was gone. He looked around, but she was nowhere to be seen. It was as if she had dissolved into the air. He returned to the ceremony with a sense of peace. He didn't need to understand everything. He didn't need rational explanations. Some miracles simply were, and to try to dissect them would be to destroy their essence. Beatrice saw him return and smiled as if she knew exactly where he had been and with whom he had spoken. Later, when they were alone, she asked, "Was it her?" "It was," Henry confirmed. "What did she say?" "That faith stays alive when we keep choosing to be human." Beatrice intertwined her fingers with his. "Then we'll keep choosing." That night on the way home, they passed by the Golden Terrace. The restaurant still shone with its characteristic elegance, but now, out back, there was a line of people waiting to be served with dignity and respect. Roger was there personally supervising the distribution. When he saw the couple, he waved. There was no longer any embarrassment in his gesture, only pride in what they had built together. "You know what's most incredible?" Beatrice said as they watched the scene. "A year ago, I couldn't walk. You had forgotten where you came from. We were alive, but we weren't living. And now? Now I walk, you remember? And for the first time in many years, we are truly alive." Henry hugged his wife right there, on the busy city sidewalk, not caring who saw them, because he had finally understood that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts or luxury developments. It was, in that moment, in that hug, in the certainty that they were making a difference. Life was no longer perfect. There were still challenges, difficulties, sleepless nights solving problems. But it was a life with purpose. It was a life that mattered. And somewhere, in the crowds of New York City, Marina smiled, knowing her mission was accomplished. Not because she had healed a woman, but because she had helped two people heal their own souls. 3 years had passed since that day in the restaurant when it all began. New York City continued its frantic dance, but for Henry and Beatrice Almeida, the city would never be the same. Project Rebirth had grown beyond any expectation. What started as 50 houses now spread across 6 different neighborhoods, totaling more than 400 families in dignified housing. Each complex maintained the same principles: quality, dignity, community. But more than numbers, it was the stories that mattered. Like Mr. Roberts, who not only got his house, but found a new purpose training young bricklayers. Like Fabian and her daughter, now living in an apartment where the girl had space to study and play. The transformation in the company was radical. Many shareholders sold their stakes, considering the new direction risky. Henry bought back a large portion of the shares, taking out loans, mortgaging his assets. Lucy warned of the risks, but he was determined. New partners emerged. Impact investors, foundations, even government agencies began to recognize the model as replicable. The company was no longer the giant it had been, but it was sustainable. And it had a soul. Beatrice had become the public face of the project. With her full recovery, she was often invited to speak at conferences and panels. At first, she felt uncomfortable with the exposure, but she realized her story gave hope to other people. She spoke openly about the 5 years in a wheelchair, about the despair, about the dark thoughts in the middle of the night. And then she would talk about Marina, about the impossible becoming reality, about how the healing of her body was just the beginning. Some called her naive. Others suggested her recovery was a coincidence, a spontaneous remission. Beatrice didn't argue. She knew what she had lived. She knew there was something in that encounter that transcended medical explanations, and she was at peace with that. The food distribution program had expanded exponentially. There were now 32 locations throughout New York, serving more than 2,000 meals daily. Other entrepreneurs had created similar programs in their own cities. In Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, New Orleans, a network had formed, connected by the same purpose. Henry and Beatrice received messages frequently, people thanking them, asking for advice. sharing stories of transformation. Each message was a reminder that small actions created waves that reached distant shores. But it wasn't all roses. There were failures. One of the housing complexes faced serious problems with vandalism, requiring intervention and restructuring. Some hired individuals didn't adapt, wasted opportunities. There was fierce criticism in the press. Every failure hurt, every criticism cut. But Henry and Beatrice learned that social transformation is not linear. It's a process full of setbacks. But giving up was never an option. It was on a Monday morning, exactly 3 years after that initial meeting, that Henry received a phone call that would change everything again. It was from Mrs. Carman, his mother. Her voice was weak, tired. "My son, I need to see you." Henry felt his stomach drop. "I'm on my way now." He drove to the Bronx in silence, his heart heavy. Over the past 3 years, his relationship with his mother had been completely rebuilt. He visited her weekly, sat at the kitchen table as he did in childhood, listened to her stories, asked for her advice. Mrs. Carman was 73 now, but her faith remained unshakable, her wisdom even deeper. When he arrived at the house he had bought for his parents years ago, he found Mrs. Carman lying in bed, visibly weak. The family doctor was there, speaking in a low voice with Henry's father. "What happened?" Henry asked, fighting back panic. The doctor explained. Mrs. Carman's heart was failing. Decades of strenuous work, of carrying heavy buckets of wet laundry, of sleepless nights worrying about her children, had taken their toll. She would need a complex, risky surgery at her age, or she could opt for palliative care and live her final months in comfort. Henry sat beside the bed and held his mother's hand. "Mom, we'll do the surgery. I'll get the best doctors, the best hospital." Mrs. Carman smiled faintly. "My son, it's not about that." "Then what is it about?" "It's about you being here. It's about seeing the man you've become. It's about knowing you haven't forgotten who you are." Henry felt tears well up. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. You're strong." "I am strong," she agreed. "But I'm also tired. I've lived a hard but good life. I raised 3 children who are good people. I saw you get lost and find yourself again. I am at peace." Henry couldn't accept it. He called Beatrice, who arrived in less than an hour. Together, they spent the day beside Mrs. Carman, talking, reminiscing, planning the surgery she had reluctantly agreed to have. That evening, as they were leaving, Mrs. Carman called Henry back. "My son," she said, "that girl, Marina, she came here." Henry froze. "What?" "A few months ago. Showed up at my door asking for a glass of water. We talked. She told me you were on the right path, that I didn't need to worry anymore." "Why did you never tell me?" Mrs. Carman gave that wise smile Henry had known since he was a child. "Because it wasn't for you to know. It was between me and her. But now I thought I should tell you. So you know that what you're doing matters, that it's making a real difference." Henry kissed his mother's forehead. "I love you, Mom." "I know, my son. I always knew." The surgery was scheduled for Friday of that same week. Henry used all his contacts to secure the best medical team, the best hospital. Beatrice organized a prayer chain among all the beneficiaries of their projects, hundreds of people now praying for a woman they had never met, but who was the mother of the man who had given them hope. The night before the surgery, Henry couldn't sleep. Lying next to Beatrice, he stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything his mother represented. Unwavering faith, hard work, unconditional love. Everything good in him came from her. "Beatrice," he whispered in the darkness, "what if we lose her?" Beatrice took his hand. "Let's not think like that. Let's have faith. I tried to have faith when you were sick, and it didn't work. It was years of unanswered prayers." "But then Marina appeared," Beatrice reminded him. "When you least expected it, when you had already given up on miracles. Maybe faith isn't about getting what we want, but about continuing to believe there's a purpose even when we don't understand." Henry turned to look at his wife in the dim light of the room. "How did you get so wise?" She smiled. "I spent 5 years unable to walk. I learned to see the world from a different perspective. I learned that some lessons only come through pain. On the day of the surgery, the waiting room was full. Henry's brothers came, bringing their children. Family, friends, neighbors, people from the Bronx community Mrs. Carmen had helped over the years. Even Lucy showed up representing the company's team. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Every minute was an eternity. Henry paced back and forth, unable to stand still. Beatrice prayed silently, her lips moving in constant supplication. When the surgeon finally came out, his face was a professional mask that revealed nothing. The Almeida family. Henry stepped forward, his heart in his throat. The surgery was successful. Your mother is a warrior. She'll need intensive care for a few days, but the prognosis is for a full recovery. The relief was so intense that Henry almost collapsed. Beatrice held him, also crying. Around them, the room erupted in tears and hugs. Can I see her? In a few hours, when she's out of recovery. Henry waited anxiously. When they finally let him into the ICU, he found Mrs. Carmen connected to several machines, pale but breathing. He approached slowly, as if afraid of breaking her. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly. A faint smile appeared on her lips. "My son, you did it. You're strong. I have to be. There's still a lot of work ahead. I need to see you build more houses, help more people. I need to see my grandchildren grow up." Henry laughed through his tears. "You'll see all that and more." Mrs. Carmen closed her eyes again, tired. Before falling asleep, she murmured, "She was right. Marina, she said you found your way." "Yes, Mom, I found it." In the following weeks, as Mrs. Carmen recovered, Henry thought a lot about Marina. 3 years had passed since he had last seen her in person at that house handover ceremony, but her presence was constant. In every face they helped, in every life they touched, there she was. Who was Marina, really? A special child, an angel, a manifestation of something divine, or just an ordinary girl who showed them what they already knew deep down but had forgotten? Henry realized the answer didn't matter. What mattered was the transformation she had catalyzed. Beatrice's healing, yes, but mainly his own healing, of his worldview, of his purpose. A month after the surgery, Mrs. Carmen was home, recovered enough to receive visitors. Henry organized a family lunch, gathering everyone he loved around the kitchen table where he grew up. In the middle of the meal, as they talked and laughed, the doorbell rang. Henry's younger brother went to answer and returned with a confused expression. "There's a girl outside. Says she wants to talk to you, Henry." Henry's heart leaped. He stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his chair, and went to the door. Marina was there, wearing the same simple clothes as always, the same serene smile. She didn't seem to have aged a single day in 3 years. "You came back," Henry said, unable to hide his emotion. "I came to say goodbye." "Goodbye?" Marina nodded. "My work here is done. You found your path. Beatrice is healed. Your mother is recovering. The seed was planted and is bearing fruit." "But," Henry began, feeling panic rise, "we still need you. We still have so much to do." "You don't need me," Marina said gently. "You never did. You just needed to remember who you are. And now you remember." Beatrice appeared behind Henry, also emotional at seeing the girl. "Marina," she said, "how can we thank you?" Marina looked at both of them with those deep eyes. "Keep doing what you're doing. Not for me, not out of gratitude, but because it's right. Because it's who you've chosen to be. And when you see others getting lost, remind them too. Be the Marina for someone." "Will we see you again?" Henry asked, already knowing the answer. "Whenever you look at someone with compassion instead of judgment, whenever you choose to help instead of ignore, you will see me. I never left. I just opened your eyes so you could see." Mrs. Carmen appeared at the door, leaning on her husband. Upon seeing Marina, her face lit up. "You came." Marina walked to the elderly woman and hugged her gently. "I came to tell you that you can rest now. Your son is well. Your faith was not in vain." "I always knew," Mrs. Carmen whispered. "I always had faith. And it was your faith that saved him," Marina said, stepping back. "Not mine. I just showed him the path your love had already prepared." She turned to leave, but Henry stopped her one last time. "Who are you? Really?" Marina looked at him for a long moment. "I am someone who was once hungry and was fed. Someone who was seen when she was invisible. Someone who received love when she deserved only indifference. And now I pass on what I received. That's what we should all be." And then, as always, she left. Henry and Beatrice watched her, walked down the street until she disappeared around the corner, and somehow they knew it would be the last time. They went back inside, hand in hand. The family was waiting for them at the table, the food still warm, the love still palpable in the air. "Who was that?" Henry's brother asked. "An angel," Mrs. Carman said simply, and no one argued. The years that followed proved Marina right. The work continued, grew, multiplied. Project Rebirth became a national model, replicated in dozens of cities. The food distribution program became public policy in some municipalities. Hundreds of people found, not just food and shelter, but dignity and hope. Henry and Beatrice grew old together, not in luxury but in purpose. They sold almost everything they owned, living simply but comfortably, investing every extra cent in the projects that had become their reason for living. Beatrice never had any more problems with her legs. She walked, ran when necessary, danced at the community parties they organized in the housing complexes. The illness never returned. The doctors called it a medical miracle. She just called it a miracle. They created a tradition. Every year on the anniversary of that first meeting, with Marina at the Golden Terrace, they organized a large community lunch. They set up tables on the street in front of the restaurant, now fully embracing its social role, and served free food to anyone who needed it. There were no speeches, no photos for publicity. It was just a moment of sharing, of communion, of remembering that humanity is about truly seeing one another. At one of these lunches, now 60 years old, Henry was serving plates when a little girl approached. She was about 8, clean and well cared for, but there was something in her eyes that made him pause. "Thank you," the girl said upon receiving her plate. "You're welcome," Henry replied, smiling. The girl turned to go, but then looked back. "You're the houseman, right?" "I'm one of the housemen," Henry corrected. "There are a lot of people working on this. My mom said you helped her when no one else would. She said you believe everyone deserves a chance. Your mother is wise, and she's right. Everyone does." The girl gave a wide smile. "When I grow up, I want to help people too. Just like you." Henry felt tears burn his eyes. "Then you'll be much better than me, because you're starting earlier." After the girl walked away, Beatrice appeared beside Henry. "She reminded you of her, didn't she?" Henry nodded, unable to speak. "That's how it works," Beatrice said softly. "Marina planted a seed in us. We plant seeds in others, and one day those seeds will blossom and plant their own seeds. It's an endless cycle, as long as we choose to keep planting." "Exactly." That night at home, Henry and Beatrice sat on the porch looking at the stars. They did this often, a silent ritual where they simply existed side by side, grateful for each day, for each moment. "Do you have any regrets?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "About everything we gave up?" Henry thought about the question. He thought about the luxury apartment they sold, the expensive cars they traded for simple models, the designer clothes they donated, the sophisticated dinners they replaced with home-cooked meals. He thought about the power he abdicated, the contacts he lost, the social standing he exchanged for purpose. "Not for a second," he answered, and it was the purest truth he had ever spoken. "Me neither," Beatrice said. "Would I trade walking again for everything we've lived through? I would. But I didn't have to choose. I got both, the physical healing and the healing of the soul." "Do you think she's up there?" Henry asked, looking at the stars. "Marina. Do you think she's watching us?" Beatrice smiled. "I think she's everywhere. There is love, compassion, people choosing good, not as a spirit, but as a presence, an energy. She is the best part of ourselves." They sat in silence for a long time, and then, in the gentle night breeze, Henry could have sworn he heard a voice, soft as a whisper, familiar as a memory. You have done well. Keep going. He looked at Beatrice, who also seemed to have heard it. They exchanged a look of understanding and smiled. In the end, Henry and Beatrice's story was not about a miraculous cure. It was about waking up. It was about remembering that we are all connected, that one person's pain is everyone's pain, that ignoring suffering doesn't make it disappear. It was about understanding that miracles don't just fall from the sky ready-made. They are built brick by brick, action by action, choice by choice. When someone decides to look instead of turning away, when someone decides to help instead of judging, when someone decides to love instead of fear. Marina had been the catalyst, but the transformation had always been in their hands. It has always been in all of our hands. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. Not that extraordinary powers exist, but that each of us has the power to change lives. Each of us can be someone's Marina. Each of us can plant seeds of hope in the arid soil of despair. You just have to choose. You just have to look. You just have to act. Henry and Beatrice made that choice, and their lives, once empty despite all their wealth, became full in their simplicity. They found what they were looking for not in renowned doctors or expensive therapies, but in a plate of food offered with dignity to a hungry child. The cure for the disease was extraordinary, but the real cure, the one that truly mattered, was the cure of the heart. And that cure, unlike any medicine or medical procedure, was permanent, because it was earned not with money or status but with love, and true love, the kind that gives without expecting anything in return, is the only force in the universe truly capable of healing any wound. Years later, when Henry and Beatrice were elderly, surrounded by grandchildren and stories of transformed lives, they were often asked the same question: was it worth it? And the answer was always the same: a serene smile, eyes that shone with wisdom gained over time, and a single word: always. Because in the end, when life is measured not by accumulated possessions but by lives touched, when success is defined not by figures in bank accounts, but by genuine smiles on faces that have known hunger, when fulfillment comes not from applause at social events, but from sincere hugs from people who were given hope, the answer can only be always. Marina had given them a gift, not the healing of Beatrice's legs, although that was extraordinary. The real gift was the reminder that it is the small actions, multiplied by millions of people, that change the world. A plate of food offered with dignity, a house built with love, a job given to someone no one else would give a chance, a look that sees humanity where others see only statistics. These were the true cures. These were the true miracles. And Henry and Beatrice Almeida, who once nearly lost themselves in the traps of success and pain, found themselves again in the small, dirty hands of a street girl who taught them the greatest lesson of all: that faith without action is empty, that love without expression is useless, that hope without work is an illusion, but that when faith, love, and hope unite in concrete actions, miracles happen, not always in the way we expect, not always when we want, but always in the way we need. And that, in the end, was their story. Not of an impossible cure, but of a necessary transformation. Not of magic, but of rediscovered humanity. It was the story of how two people, lost in their own pain and privilege, found their way back home, and how on that journey they brought hundreds of others with them. It was, above all, living proof that it is never too late to change. It is never too late to choose good. It is never too late to be the difference in someone's life. And somewhere amidst the streets of New York City, Marina smiles. Because her mission continues not through her, but through every person who chooses to see, chooses to help, chooses to love. The mysterious girl who healed a woman and saved a man. Or perhaps the ordinary girl who just reminded two human beings of who they were always meant to be. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Henry and Beatrice has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, faith, and love for one's neighbor, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment touched your soul the most. Every day, we bring intense and true stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and most human side of each of us. Stories that make us reflect, cry, smile, and above all, believe that it's never too late to change, to do good, to be the difference in someone's life. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and touch your heart. See you soon.